Hello everybody, international trade, and we are just in the theory starting to explain why maybe trading with each other is a good idea. Right now there are some guys around in the world which have an opposite opinion. Well, we see where the world is going. We started here with the so-called Ricardo model, and in order to also illustrate, and maybe we also start to do a little example for the Ricardo model today when we are through with the specific factors model. So what is the Ricardo model all about? You have two different countries here, red and green, which can produce two goods, B and A, for their own with a linear production technology. And this linear production technology is just represented here by this red and green production possibility frontier, or called also transformation curve. And then you ask, well, what is the benefit if they work together? And for this, we have talked about the concept of comparative advantage, and the slope of these transformation curves just represent the exchange ratio between these two goods in the two different countries. So going to the right means defined by the slope of the transformation curve. You have to reduce the production of the other good by slope times 1 unit of, here if you go to the right, of good A. Then defined by the slope of the curve, if here maybe you go from 1 to 2, or in the green one you go from 5 to 6, then this vertical part is just the reduction of the other good B you have to do when you increase the production of the other good. Well, and then of course, if the two slopes are different, the one country has a comparative advantage in producing one good and the other country in the other good. And if they now work together, then you just move outward the flatter transformation curve parallel horizontally and the steeper one to the right. And what is the idea behind? Well, here at the top, this means this is the maximum amount of B which can both countries produce together. And then you think of, well, if you want to have not only B, but also A, then you just can ask who of the two countries should start with the production of B. Well, and then of course, the one with the flatter slope, because if he is going to the right by 1 unit, the reduction of B is smaller than with respect to the country where the transformation curve is steeper. So, and then you're just increasing to the maximum amount of A. Here the green country could produce, and if you then even want to have more A, then of course you have to start also with the production in country red with A. And therefore this together then represents the total production possibilities of both countries which are efficient. And what is meant by efficient? Well, there is no possibility to change somehow your production in order to increase production. This is given the amount of labor here, as we have only one production factor, then you are producing in every point on the aggregated transformation curve, the maximum basket given the total labor amount of A and B. This is meant by efficient. Well, and then in a modern interpretation, you just can say, well, if they now both specialize due to their comparative advantage, then of course the green one is only producing A and the red one is only producing B. So we would then end up in this production point, and then of course in general this wouldn't be the optimal division of A and B in both countries, because in general the demand in both countries would be that both countries want to have A and B. And if you only produce one and you are not trading, then maybe you say, well, it's now I've specialized due to my comparative advantage. But if it's cars and bread, then you say, I have only cars. I also want to eat something. But then you can interchange, and due to the different exchange ratios in these two countries represented by the slope of the transformation curve, you have the situation when they both go to the market with their baskets. Green country in his basket is only A, red country in his basket is only B. Then from the idea, the red country wants less, at least in exchange for his production B, than green is able to pay because of these different exchange ratios in the countries. And therefore, it is a classical win-win situation which you have at a free market. That due to your preferences, you say, well, I want something to eat. I would buy at maximum for €2 an apple. And the producer of apples, due to his costs in production of an apple, he maybe say, well, I want to have at least €1.20. And then they are trading, and somewhere in between they meet. And where do we meet? We meet somewhere in an exchange ratio represented here with the yellow lines, with an exchange ratio which is in between the slopes of the two transformation curves. And this, of course, then can be interpreted as just the price ratio of these two goods, A and B. And then we can think of, well, this orange line here, we can interpret as the total income line. Have I written it down? Oh no, only E, but this can, let's do it in orange, as E equals PA times A plus PB times B. And this, hopefully, you remember from your micro course, this is also the same as your budget line. And there you also have introduced the price ratio of the budget line as the slope of the budget line. Well, and now we know that somewhere in between of these flat and steep transformation curve is the slope price ratio of the income or budget line, representing a price ratio where both countries, green and red, feels better. And then you think, well, this one, in black, sorry, this is the production possibility frontier. And then we just think in maximizing income given the aggregated production possibility. We want to move as far outward as possible our income line E. Well, and then this I have drawn here in moving this outward. And well, then of course we end up in this kink as the maximum outward lying income line. Well, and when we then see where these optimal income line cuts the horizontal, the vertical and the horizontal axis, then we know that this number of income, maybe 1,000 euros, if we are measuring prices in euros, represents an income which is equal to the amount of B up to the cut at the vertical axis. And then you see the benefit of trade, because if they both work only alone, the maximum amount of B which they can produce together is this point here. So this part here is then, so to speak, a measure of the benefit of at first specializing due to the comparative advantage and afterwards trading. And the same you can see also on the horizontal line. This is the income now measured in units of A. The maximum units of A I can produce when they both work alone is this cut. So this one is, so to speak, the benefit measured now in A of specializing and afterwards trading. And this is, so to speak, some kind of a modern interpretation of the Ricardo model. You will not always find this interpretation in other lectures or in standard textbooks. In the Gandolfo also these classical 800 pages international trade textbook, there you find it. But in an, so to speak, usual lecture on Ricardo model, you only talk about these comparative advantage and that one wants to have due to the home exchange ratio, let's say 2 cars for 100 breads, and the bread producer is able to pay 150 breads for 2 cars. But we will do there also then an example on this. Okay, so, but then switch to the specific factors model, because in the Ricardo model we had only one production factor, labor, and then to be more realistic, we introduce a second production factor, here then capital, and we say capital is specific to the production of a special good. So to speak, the industrial specialized machine you can only use in producing pills in a pharmaceutical sector. You cannot use this machine in the agricultural sector in order to produce wheat. And there we also argued, oh sorry, I haven't seen you, and just a minute. And there also we argued that when we are arguing that there are specific factors, then this directly also means that this is a short-term or a medium-term view comparing to the general interpretation of costs, where you also say in the short medium term you have fixed costs, but in the long run you have only variable costs because you always then can sell the the investment which you have sometime made, and so you can also say my special machine in order to produce pills I can in the long run sell and then take the capital and buy some machinery which I can use in the agricultural sector. Okay, question? Well, in this case, we do not talk, we do not, we think that, oh, here I have also written that down. We say that we have an inelastic labor supply, so everybody who can work will also be applied, will also be will also be working. So we have here in our model no unemployment. So the labor supply curve is then just a vertical line. But what we assume is that here labor is totally flexible, that everybody can work in both sectors. And having this, also our positive but decreasing marginal products and our constant returns to scale neoclassical production function. From this now we derived a somehow similar transformation curve compared to the Ricardo model in this 4-quadrant diagram, where we said this is just the possibility, this linear line with slope -1. Every point on this linear line represents a possible division between the two sectors, the agricultural and the industrial sector. Then, given the amount in the agricultural sector, moving up to the production function in the production sector means this 0.6 of, let's say, 10 million people in the country, they can produce this amount of wheat. And the other one, then the 4 million people left in the country, if you have in total 10 million in the industrial sector going to the production function of the industrial sector, this is then the amount of machinery they can produce, and together we find then this is one production possibility, one basket of G and M. And this construction we can do for every point on this labor line. And then due to the curvature of these two production functions, we obtain also a concave transformation curve. And why is it similar to the Ricardo model? Well, of course, in the Ricardo model, you also can think that there are not only two countries, but that there are many, many, many countries, all with transformation curves with different slopes. But then how do I get the aggregated transformation curves of, so to speak, 10 countries? This always means I'm starting, moving upward the flattest line, adding the second flattest line, and so on. and so I obtain more or less the same shape when I look at the Ricardo model, not using only 2 countries, but many countries. So these are 2 models where we can motivate this concave shape of the production possibility frontier, and this is mostly done, but in the end, when we then will flexibilize maybe next week the second production factor, then we see that in this case, in general, our production possibility frontier need not to be concave anymore. For this, we need an additional assumption. But we will see this. But in general, if you look in textbooks, in other lectures, or somewhere else, when we are talking about the transformation curve, in general, we just draw such a concave curve. Okay, then we switched to the labor market, to labor demand, and there from our change of the labor of the production, changing the labor amount due to positive but decreasing, we obtain a decreasing function in L of the marginal product of labor. And since the only flexible production factor is labor, taking the derivative of wheat and machinery with respect to labor, then we obtain that the, where do I have it? Here, that the slope of the transformation curve has to be just the relation between the 2 marginal products, and this also you can compare with your microcurves, where you had the indifference curve, and the slope of the indifference curve was also the relation, the ratio of the marginal utilities. So this is, so to speak, the same concept. And if you then think of in your microcurves, you also have to you have talked about the isoquants in the production view. There also the slope of the isoquant was also just the ratio of the derivatives. So this is also almost always the same mathematics which we are doing. Well, then having this, we went to now the overall labor market, because then we say, well, what are our firms are doing? Of course, they are maximizing their profits. And the only variable which we have is labor. This enters the profit function at 2 points. In the production function, the amount of wheat is depending on the amount of labor, and of course, the costs. And the costs are just linear, wages times the amount of labor. And then taking the derivative means just price of wheat times marginal product of labor equals wages. And this hopefully you have seen in many other lectures. This is the profit optimal condition which we always have, especially when we look at full competitive markets. Because I cannot do anything about the price. I'm not a price setter. I take prices if I am in full competitive markets. Why do I have to take the price as given? Well, if I would charge a higher price, everybody would go to my neighbor. So please take this not only for this trade lecture, but in general in mind. Full competitive markets means the marginal value product equals the price of the input factor. Okay, but then we can use our result from the former slide. Slope of transformation curve is the ratio of the marginal products, because labor is totally flexible. Then under full competition, the wages in both sectors have to coincide. Why do they have to coincide? If in one sector I pay a higher wage, everybody is moving there. Then in equilibrium, they have to be equal. And if they have to be equal, then for both sectors we have this condition: marginal value product equals wages. On the right side, the wages coincide. Then this means, very surprising, price ratio in optimum is slope of the transformation curve. And this also you have seen in your micro course. Price ratio equals the slope of the indifference curve in the household optimum. Well, and if we take it graphically, then we can say, moving here from the left downward, this represents labor demand. Oh, I have written it down here. Labor demand in the agricultural sector. And then everybody who is working in the agricultural sector cannot work in the industrial sector. So then if I maybe go at this point, this would be my wage coinciding with this labor demand in the agricultural sector. And this means from here to the total labor amount, L bar, everybody is working in the industrial sector. So I just take the labor demand function then from the right downward to the left in the industrial sector. And this means the cut of these two labor demand functions is also here in a graphical way what we have written down here in the analytical way. The cut here is the labor market equilibrium. So given our two different production functions, from the production functions, taking the derivative with respect to labor, we obtain times the price of the two goods, we obtain the labor demand functions, and the cut of the two labor demand functions represent then the labor market equilibrium. So this is then the optimal division in a country given the two production possibilities frontiers. Okay, and now we want to open for the world market. Well, if at the world market the prices of the two goods would be the same, then of course nothing would happen. But let's say we are, so to speak, a small country. So entering the world market will not change anything by the prices in the world market. So again, we are taking the world market price as given, and we just, without loss of generality, we just assume that the price of wheat should be the same, but the price of machines should be higher at the world market. So what would then happen? Let's take red, blue, and then again orange or yellow. In this diagram. So this is, so to speak, our starting diagram. We are alone. This would be the equilibrium. Now we opening our market and we realize, or the producers of machines realize that they can sell their products for higher prices. Which curve in this diagram would change and how will it change? Where is the price of machinery entering? The internet can also participate if you want. Yep. On the vertical axis, what do you mean by the vertical axis? The red, yes, the red curve moves upwards. Yes, you are totally right, because here we find the price, and maybe in starting it was 2 euros and now it's 3 euros. So, and now moving up qualitatively is okay. And if you look there, you find P times marginal product. Then you can a little bit more specific how this curve moves upwards. Is this a parallel shift? Is this some turning? Maybe you can specify this. Try it. Because this is also a crucial point. Not only that it's moving upward, but how it is moving upward. Let's take another example, maybe a little bit easier. F of x, and let's say f of x is 1/2 x. Then this would be a flat linear line, a little bit flatter or half flat than just the diagonal of this quadrant, which would have a slope of 1. So this, of course, we can interpret as a price, maybe 50 cents. How is this curve changing if we have a new function, let's say 2 times x? Yes, it is becoming steeper, it is moving upward, but we can say, well, since here we have a multiplication, this point here moves a larger distance upwards compared to this smaller number, because both numbers are multiplied by 2. And if this is maybe 0.25, then we have an absolute change of also 0.25. And if this is maybe 2, then we have 2 times 2 is 4. The absolute change is 4. No, the absolute change from 2 to 4 is 2. And here the change would be only 0.25. So now we have not a linear line, but we have a somehow bended curve, but we have the same interpretation. Increasing P means every point on this red curve has to be multiplied with the larger number. So we have no parallel shift, but also the small numbers are shifted in absolute values a smaller distance than the large points here. So if we draw now qualitatively the new labor demand curve in the industrial sector, we maybe then come from somewhere here and downward the distance between the 2 points on the different labor demand curves is here larger than downward on the left. Okay? So, well, and then of course, this is just the new situation. We do not have the math again. Nothing else changes. We obtain a new labor market equilibrium due to the world market prices. So this is PM prime times GPLM and PM prime larger than PM, and we obtain a new labor market equilibrium now due to the world market situation. Well, and then something very surprising happens. Since the price of machinery is higher, I start to increase the labor amount in the machinery in the industrial sector. So, although the price of wheat is not changing due to the increase in the industrial sector and the assumption of totally flexible labor input, there are some guys which are now switching to the industrial sector. So now the amount of labor in the industrial sector is increased in the agricultural sector decreased. Well, what also happens is the overall wage is rising. And now it is also important that again, totally flexible, in the whole country, this higher wage has to be paid. Also, the industrial sector has to pay this higher wage because of a full competitive labor market with fully flexible labor. Overall wage in the country rises from V star to W star to W star W. Sorry. My English is not the very best. I hope you understand me. Okay. So, and now somehow, if you remember what I have said in the beginning of the lecture, we have somehow a problem. Because what I said, well, we are talking about international trade and why it is maybe a good idea to trade with each other. After this argumentation, why maybe you can now question this statement, trade is a good idea. when you see what happens now in this model when I'm opening my market. Is everybody happy? Because this was what we have argued in the Ricardo model. We have a win-win situation. Everybody is happy after they have traded with this new ratio in between the ratios representing the different comparative advantage. Is now in this situation everybody happy? Yeah? 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 Okay. Okay, so from this, but is it everybody who can charge higher prices in the production? Just the industrial ones. Just the industry. So would you then still say that everybody is happy? Well, there we have assumed at the world market we have the same price. And even they have now also to pay the higher wages. So their output prices are still the same, but they have to pay higher wages. So increased costs and the revenue more or less not the same, even they have also to reduce their production. Though they cannot be still in the optimum. Okay, and you said, well, this is also only the first shot. You said, well, I'm happy because if I'm looking at my banking account every month for everybody, totally flexible labor, every worker has now a higher income. This is what we see here. And now, taking maybe other introductory courses, maybe also macroeconomics, and of course always microeconomics, is it definitely true that every worker seeing a higher income at his banking account is in this new situation better off? Can you definitely say this? That only from the information that I, within a month, have now, let's say, 3,000 euros, and before the opening, I had 2,500 euros. Am I then always happier? I said, remember my macro course? There we have talked about nominal and real GDP, and I showed you a diagram that we have in nominal GDP in 2021 and 2022 a huge increase. We had measured in nominal GDP economic growth of 7% or 8% it was. Were we everybody happy? Well, overall income, interpreted GDP as income from the distribution side, has increased by almost 10%. This is a great situation for our country, 21, 22. Yeah. We had a large inflation. So, because especially energy prices moved up by, I'm sorry, 30, 40%. And therefore, if we remember, this time we were not very happy. And even the government has introduced the cut for the gasoline, that more or less the prices at the gas station could not rise much higher than 2 euros or something like this. And now look at this situation. Keeping in mind nominal versus real, or what are you doing with your money, with your income? Your income in euros is now higher due to this increase here. But am I definitely happier? Yeah? Yeah? Wouldn't it affect you? Yeah? Yeah? Well, we are still only in this situation. So we are in our country. Our country is opening for the world market, and the only thing which we see from the world market is the change of the price of the industrial good. So we do not think that I even can buy other goods. Yeah, I can buy only these two goods. You definitely can buy more. You have a higher wage, but what is also higher? So, and now comes the crucial point. Does it really match up? So I think in your mind, you think, well, this price has increased. Let's say it's cars, and my wage has increased. And what you think is, okay, my wage has relatively as much increased as the price of cars. And is this really true? This you can see from your graphics and from our discussion. How is this line and this curve are changing? This had represented has represented the wage at the situation under autarky. This was the wage under autarky. Now we are moving to the left to the new equilibrium. So this is the change of wages. But where can we see here in the graphic the change of the price? What represents the change of the price? If you maybe think now from the point of this labor market equilibrium, or you can also argue from this one here. What represents the change of the price? The change of the price is represented by the distance between these two curves, because this was the argumentation how we move this curve upward. And now, since this is not only a horizontal shift, because our new labor market equilibrium is on the left, we know that represents the change of prices of machinery, we see that this absolute change here is larger, or has to be, due to the bending of the curve, or the downward sloping of the curve, not the bending, the downward sloping of the curve, is larger than the increase of our wages. So I'm sorry, it is not true that although you have a higher income, you now can buy less cars if you spend all your money in cars in the industrial sector. Because the price of the industrial goods has relatively risen with a larger amount than your increased wage. And this you also can see here from the graphics. So the relative increase, or no, not, we can just write it down. So the increase of wages is smaller than the increase of the price of machines. So this means workers can now buy less machines after trade than before. But if I'm preferring to eat, if I prefer to buy agricultural goods, what can I say then when my wages has increased and the price of the agricultural good is still the same? Yeah. Yes, but workers can buy more wheat. So, and now please take your microeconomics course. Am I better off as a worker? I see some question marks in your faces, and this is good because I cannot answer this. Because this is now due to your preferences. If you, a guy which really wants to go outside having a good meal, then you are happy. I have, so to speak, for example, 500 euros more, and so I now can afford a better restaurant or something like this, because the prices in the restaurant are still the same. But if I'm a guy who loves fast cars, then I say, "Pooh, I have more money, but the Ferrari is even more expensive than my increase of my wage, so still I cannot buy the Ferrari." So then I would be worse off. And now we can also go to the industrial sector, because there it is also not directly clear that they are better off. About this we have also to think, because at first they are happy, well, I can sell for higher prices. But the new labor market equilibrium means also, well, I have a higher revenue, but also I have to pay higher wages, so my costs are increasing. But then by the same argumentation we have just made for the workers, we see also that relatively my revenue is increasing more than my costs, because the change in prices is larger than the change in wages. And therefore, I can argue, so to speak, the export sector, they are increasing their production and they are better off because they can sell more expensive, and the increase of costs is definitely lower than the increase of revenue. So they are happy. But I can say the import sector, now there are also other people from an agricultural sector from abroad, which are now selling for the same price also at my market, and I have still to sell for the same price, but I have the increased costs because I have to pay the higher wages. So definitely I can say the agricultural sector in our example, or in general the import sector, would say, well, this was not a good idea to open the country. And then we have the workers. Maybe some are happy, the ones who want to go to a restaurant, and others who wants to have the Ferrari, they say, well, it was not a good idea. So overall, we have to admit we don't know. From this point of analysis, if it is a good idea for the country overall to open their markets. Because then we can say this crazy guy in the United States, maybe he is right, there are always winners and losers. And he wants to be on the winner side, and therefore he has these crazy ideas. And if he now is leaving my lecture, then he will go there and just writing some message on X. Well, you see, Ricardo model, okay, but this is a totally bullshit model because you have only one production factor. This is much too easy to describe the situation and see. Just at the first point, when we are more realistic, everything works like I said it. There are always winners and losers, and we have to make deals. But we have another 25 minutes, and we can go further in the analysis. So from this, overall, we do not know if trade is overall welfare increasing. Because we have here winners, losers, and some people where we have to make a question mark. So, but this labor market equilibrium we can interpret also in another way, because this labor market equilibrium defines us the equilibrium labor amount in the industrial sector, and this is the labor amount in the agricultural sector. And this translates in an amount of machinery given this labor amount, and this translates in an amount of wheat in the agricultural sector. So this defines us not only the division of the people who is working in the agricultural sector, who is working in the industrial sector, it also defines us the basket of the two goods we are producing in the amount. Okay, and for this we also now compare the situation with trade and without trade. And let's start with the situation without trade. What did we have derived? This was on this slide. The price ratio equals the slope of the transformation curve. And let's say it would be this production point. So this line, again, income curve, this is the same interpretation which we have made in the beginning of the lecture when I have talked about the Ricardo model. This is nothing else than E equals, or let's say E under autarky equals price of wheat times meat plus price of machinery times machinery. And I think you have also solved this in your microeconomic course as here G equals E over PG minus PM over PG times G. Well, and the argumentation, why is this the efficient, the optimal point? It is also the same as in the Ricardo model. This is the most outward shifted income curve given the production possibility. Frontier, the transformation curve, when the income curve has our given price ratio under autarky. So this is the given price ratio under autarky. So, and what have we now assumed? Now we have assumed that, again, price of machinery should increase. Which curve is then changing in this diagram? To PM prime, again, larger than PM. So this is the optimal point, the efficient point under autarky, this one. What happens if PM is increasing? I don't know. I ask you, what is changing? PM as a variable moves up from 2 euros to 3 euros. You do not have to give me direct the result, what is happening, but only what is qualitatively changing. And then we want to analyze, well, what happens in our economy. Okay? Yeah, in absolute values, this number here moves up from 2 to 3. This is still the same. So we obtain mathematically a smaller number because it's minus, but we think in slopes, in absolute values, so this line will be steeper. Okay, then I will steal just this line. So if this line will be steeper. And let's change also the color. Let's take here this one I had. So now we have a steeper line. Let's make it even steeper. Would we still produce the same? Well, we already know from the labor market that we will produce another basket of G and M. But if we just would say we are turning our income line within the production point under autarky, would this situation now still be optimal? Or since we already know that the situation will change, why will it change and how can we graphically represent the change? Why can this income line now not anymore represent the optimal, the efficient production in our country? For G, and what is with M? Is this? So this is the optimal amount of M under autarky, and this is the optimal amount of G under autarky. Only for G? And why? If you think of your microcourse, there you had your budget line, and this was your optimal indifference curve. And if we now change here the slope, this was M over E over P2 and E over P1. And let's say now that we are increasing P1, what happened in your microcourse? If P1 is increasing, then your budget line, shifts. And how did it shift? P1 larger, inwards, yeah, and not only shifting. And there I want to be that you really learn to be a little bit more specific. I think you have the right thing in mind, but if you say only shift, then I cannot draw something. Steeper, yes, and this is the crucial point. So here nothing changes, but the real income is decreasing, measured in units of x1, so it will also be steeper. Well, and then this means this indifference curve cannot be optimal anymore. Why? Because I'm outside the possible consumption baskets. I cannot afford this point anymore. So my indifference curve has now to shift inward. Maybe where it definitely lies, I don't know. This is due to the substitution and the income effect. And now you have to be a little bit careful, because here in microeconomics, the budget line is, so to speak, your condition, and what you are changing is your utility, represented by the banded curve, the indifference curve. And now we have interchanged, so to speak, the curves. Now the banded curve, the blue one, the transformation curve, is our fixed condition, because still how we are produced, the production functions have not changed. Still, it's just derived from this graphical representation. Only because the prices has changed, still our production possibilities are still the same. So, here we cannot do anything about the blue line, but we can change the production point which we choose on this condition. And our aim now is the yellow one, but the yellow one, especially here, we see that we can reach production points which correspond to an outward shift of the yellow income line, so corresponding to a higher income. So what we are now just doing is we are shifting outward parallel our yellow line as far as possible until again the situation where now the new steeper slope of the yellow line is tangent to the production possibility. So this one now is our production point with trade. Here again, slope of TC equals now our new price ratio pi m prime over PG. Okay? Well, and then of course we also see this has to be the same as we have derived from the labor market. The amount with trade of machinery is increasing. We are producing now more machines, as we have also seen in the labor market. And trade wheat is decreasing. Okay, but now we are more or less still in the argumentation. Well, from this point of the analysis, again, we can say the export sector is winning, the import sector is losing, and workers we don't know. But now we have another difference compared to the situation under autarky. Under autarky, this is not only the production point, this is also the consumption point. Because if I'm alone in the world, or if I'm in North Korea having big walls around my country, then I can only consume what I produce. So this is also the consumption point under autarky. Although the red line represents income, I cannot buy anything else. But now I have opened for the world market. Now I can take this interpretation that the yellow line is now representing income. Now I'm participating on international trade, so everybody can not only sell at the world market, everybody can now also buy at the world market. So now I can really say, well, due to the prices, PM prime and PG, selling, adding up, PM prime times M trade plus, so this represents income of E trade equals PM prime times M trade plus PG times G trade. This is now euros or US dollars. And with this euros, US dollars, I can also start buying at the world market. And now we are switching to microeconomics, interpreting this as a budget line. This is maybe now 2 million euros, which I can use to buy G and M flexible in amounts, because what I want to buy, given the prices I can buy, if I'm not producing that much at home, then I can buy it just in France. So now I interpret that everything, oops, sorry. Let's do this also in yellow. Everything under the trade income line can be bought. So still we have not modeled preferences. Remember the workers, there we said, well, we don't know. It's due, although they have a higher income, the one price is relatively higher than the income increase. I don't know if he feels better off. And now we make a very, only one assumption on preferences. And what is maybe not taking the very first one, that we can really rate every basket, but what is maybe the second most chosen assumption which we make on preferences, where we would say this is so general that at least we think that everybody would say, yeah, okay, this assumption is also for me okay. Or go through the general assumptions which you have done in micro or in business administration on preferences. Which assumptions? Yeah, that we are never satisfied, and which easy statement can we say in order to describe this theoretical assumption? We are never satisfied. More is always better. Yeah. So now we assume non-saturation, or more is always better for preferences. Well, and now we look at the possible consumption points, everything under the new budget line compared to the point under autarky. And what we see then, that we still can consume the same amounts as in the situation under autarky. Because the situation under autarky is lying under the new income budget line. But what we also can say, consuming the same amount of machines buying the same amount of Ferraris, we can now increase from here to here the amount of wheat. Or the other situation, given the same amount of wheat, we can now buy more Ferraris. So this small little triangle represents now consumption points where, together with more is always better, we can say the consumption points together with this assumption on preferences, more is always better. We know that there are all overall consumption points in our society where we can say these are preferable compared to the situation under autarky. So this triangle represents consumption points where we can say that these baskets are preferable compared to the situation of autarky. So the statement is a little bit less compared to Ricardo, because at the first point, opening means there are winners, losers, and ambitious parts, the workers. But then we can say, again, we can trade. We can consume now new baskets. We do not have to consume the same we have produced. And this, since we have now more possibilities to consume, in the end, we can say we can choose an overall consumption point of the whole society where we can say the country is better off. Well, and this now we have in practical to interpret economically. This means after trade, at first there are losers, but we know due to our larger consumption points that we now have another income. We can say there is a transfer mechanism so that the winners of the export sector can give up a little bit from their winning part, but still saying, well, I maybe say I have won, measured in euros, 20 euros compared to the situation under autarky. So if I give up from this profit of 20, let's say 15, then I still have the 5. And with the 15, I can pay the guys from the import sector or the workers which do not feel better off. And this is distributed to these at first losers so that they also can overall increase their consumption, that in the end everybody feels better. So there is a redistribution mechanism, and this is this triangle that we can say if we then redistribute, then everybody is happy. But there, of course, for the actual situation, this we have to admit, there is a problem. That you have an overall gain, that you really redistribute this gain so that everybody is better off. and think of a society in a dictatorship. Well, they are opening, improving their overall income, but still only the dictator takes it all. And so to speak, this can be, maybe it is an easy interpretation, of course, can be interpreted in the relation to Russia. They really trade a lot because of their resources, gas, metals, oil, and so on. So, of course, the country benefits from this, but on average, maybe only 10-15% of the population really gains from this international trade. Okay, that it was for today. Thank you very much.